Gerbėmieji,
Members of the Seimas, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, we now begin today's morning plenary sitting. And we now begin the commemorative ceremony dedicated to mark the 80th anniversary of the liquidation of the Vilna ghetto. Participants of this sitting include the Prime Minister of the Republic of Lithuania, Excellencies Ambassadors, Mr. Michał Kamiński, Deputy Marshal of the Polish Senate, Mr. Dani Dayan, Chairman of the Yad Vashem Directorate, Ms. Faina Kuklansky, Chairwoman of the Lithuanian Jewish Community, representatives of different institutions and public activists. Ladies and gentlemen, over 6 million of Jews died during the genocide. So I invite everyone to observe a minute of silence in tribute to the victims.
toliau posėdžiui pirmininkaus
Mr. Paulius Saudargas will now take over the chairmanship of today's sitting. Thank you, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Madam Speaker of the Seimas, for her introductory word.
Garbus svečiai, visi
Distinguished guests, Holocaust survivors, rescuers and their family members, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, dear members of the Seimas. This year, as you may know, we mark the 18th anniversary of the liquidation of the Vilnius ghetto. This year, as you may know, we mark the 700th anniversary of our capital, Vilnius. These two dates are intrinsically linked as the beginning and the end of a history. In 1323, Lithuania's ruler Gediminas addressed a letter to the skilled people of Western Europe, craftsmen, farmers, merchants. He offered them favorable conditions, invited them to come and contribute to the prosperity of the country. Undoubtedly, the rumor of a tolerant land reached the Jewish communities of Europe. Thus, Gediminas' letter, which mentions the name of Vilnius for the first time, became a precondition for the beginning of the Jewish history in Vilnius. Just over 50 years later, privileges granted by Vytautas and his successors consolidated the autonomy of Jews, ensured the legal protection provided by the state, and created good opportunities to participate in the economic life. The number of the Jewish communities increased, they grew stronger, and engaged in a wide range of activities. Organizational structures emerged to bring together and coordinate different communities. From the late 16th century onwards, they ensured broad autonomy and strong self-government for the Lithuanian Jews. At that time, the system of Jewish education was taking its shape, and it enabled almost all young people to learn to read and write. Jews became a significant force in boosting the economy of Lithuanian towns and villages and developing crafts and trading. Vilnius used to be called the Jerusalem of the North, also attracted the intellectual and spiritual luminaries of the Jewish tradition. It is reflected in a well-known saying, "For earnings go to Warsaw, but for wisdom go to Vilnius." In the historical territory of Lithuania, a peculiar type of Jews, Litvaks, characterized by a certain worldview and a peculiar way of thinking, was starting to evolve. After the decline of the 17th century, the life of Litvaks recovered in the 18th century. One of the signs of the spiritual revival was Elia ben Solomon Zalman, widely known as the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon was the founder of the Lithuanian or Litvak branch of Judaism, which continues to have a major influence in Israel today. It is no coincidence that the Seimas has declared year 2020 as the year of the Vilnius Gaon and Lithuanian Jewish history. In 1918, After Lithuania's declaration of independence, the Jewish community was granted all the minority rights. Ministers without portfolios of Jewish affairs were part of country's governments until 1924, which is a unique case during the interwar period in Europe. Ministers of Jewish affairs were concerned not only with affairs of their compatriots, but also foreign affairs, taxation, social benefits, and education, thus affecting general Lithuania's policy. When the Nazis entered Lithuania and Jews were exposed to the mortal danger, unprecedented in the history of almost 700 years, the first Minister for Jewish Affairs, Jokūbas Vygockis, then an 84-year-old doctor, member of the Vilnius City Council, president of the Jewish Society, he tried to negotiate with the German administration, but was thrown in jail. His wife died in the Vilnius ghetto together with almost 60,000 other Jews of Vilnius. It is a painful and extremely tragic ending of a remarkable chapter of history built bit by bit over almost 7 centuries, an ending without an ending, which raises a question: how could it happen that the efforts of almost 30 generations were wiped out in such a short 2-year period of history? It was the ending which was a start of a new history of remembrance, calling for composure, respect, empathy, and understanding. The remembrance will not bring back the previous life full of energy, vitality, dreams, and ideals, but it can make this life more sensitive, meaningful, and more just. Let us remember it so it never happens again. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we now invite Madam Speaker to read the letter by Ms. Roberta Metsola, President of the European Parliament.
On this most solemn occasion, as we confront a dark and hateful chapter of Lithuania's and Europe's history, the European Parliament recommits itself to never being silent in the face of discrimination, hatred, and persecution. It recommits itself to the spirit of the Union's motto of united in diversity. As the genocide against them raged on, the Jews of the Jerusalem of Lithuania staged theatrical productions, undertook scientific work, kept a museum open, and persisted in the face of terrible adversity. We honor their resilience and their strength and their memories. Thank you.
Dėkojame Europos parlamento pirmininkei Robertai Metsolai.
We thank the President of the European Parliament for the letter, as well as for the Madam Speaker for reading it. And I would now like to direct your attention to the screen, where we will listen to the introductory words by the President of the Israeli Knesset.
Parliament, Holocaust survivors, distinguished guests. It is a great privilege for me to take part, even if online, in this commemorative event hosted by the Seimas, marking the National Memorial Day for the genocide of Lithuanian Jews. This year's event holds even deeper significance as we mark the 80th anniversary of the liquidation of the Vilna ghetto. For hundreds of years, Lithuania was a unique center of rich Jewish tradition. In Lithuania, prominent rabbis led communities, academies of Jewish learning, yeshivas, thrived, and rabbinic leaders determined elements of Jewish law accepted in the Orthodox Jewish world to this day. Additionally, the country was home to intellectual and cultural figures, artists and philosophers whose impact was felt throughout the world. All of this was cut short in the Holocaust, when the Nazis and their local collaborators destroyed most of the Jewish community in the country. Entire communities across Lithuania were completely wiped out and the vast majority of their members murdered. Today's event in Parliament reflects the important change that has taken place in Lithuania as it relates to preserving the memory of the Holocaust. This change is also evident in the various decisions adopted by the Seimas in recent years. Among them, the legislation for property restitution and the determination of a day of commemoration for Lithuanian righteous among the nations. These steps demonstrate a courageous and values-driven leadership, and for that we express our appreciation. The ties between Israel and Lithuania are strong and sincere, based on the tragic past, but also on shared values and close cooperation in many fields. However, it is important to remember that there is still a lot of work to be done, and now is not a time to rest on our laurels. We are witnessing an alarming rise in anti-Semitism around the world, and in Europe in particular. We in the Knesset stand firmly by your side in the uncompromising fight against anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion. We must work together to promote a safer, freer, and more inclusive world so that the unspeakable tragedy of the Holocaust will never again be repeated. Never again. In closing, I would like to thank you once more, Madam Speaker, for holding this special plenary session today. By remembering the past, we will ensure a better future. Thank you.
Дякуємо.
We thank to the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, Mr. Amir Ohana, for these words of wisdom. And we now would like to give the floor to Mr. Michał Kamiński, Deputy Marshal of the Senate of Poland.
Gerbiamoji pirmininke, dear Mrs. Speaker, it is with due solemnity that I wish to commemorate with you the tragic events of World War II on the National Memorial Day for the genocide of the Lithuanian Jews. The fate that the Nazi criminals prepared for the Jewish community living in Europe, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, is dreadful. This happened over 80 years ago, but must remain a cautionary tale forever. The memory of those heinous acts should serve as a warning for us never to hold another man in such contempt. During World War II, Germans wiped out a Jewish population of around 6 million. Jews were forced into specially set up ghettos, overcrowded, famished, with diseases fast disseminating the community. From there, they were transported to death camps or mass execution sites. This way, Germans killed almost the entire Jewish population, nearly annihilating both the nation itself as the Jewish culture in Europe. For the people of Central and Eastern Europe, the crime of Holocaust is of particular significance. The Germans carried out an armed takeover of our countries, deprived us of our freedom, imposed their rights, and developed here their industry of death, aimed especially at Jews, who were plundered, used as slaves, and eventually exterminated by the Nazi invaders. What remains is our duty to preserve the truth of what happened here under the German occupation and hand it down through the generations to come. We must nurture the memory of the victims of those times so that these cruel crimes never occur again. This message is particularly pertinent today with the ongoing war in Ukraine. Today, we are with you in spirit. I would like to ensure that we, the modern-day Europeans, do not forget about our past and want to build a better future equipped with our historical experience. We will always, nonetheless, remember our fellow Jewish citizens who were murdered and who died due to the German persecution. Lest we forget, yours sincerely, Tomasz Grodzki, Marshal of the Senate of the Republic of Poland. Thank you very much.
Dėkoju Lenkijos Respublikos Senato pirmininko pavaduotojui Michał Kamińskiui.
We thank Mr. Michał Kamiński, Deputy Marshal of the Polish Senate, who read to us the words by the Marshal of the Senate of Poland. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Faina Kukliansky, Chairman of the Jewish Community of Lithuania.
Labai diena, gerbiamas Seime.
Good morning, members of the Seimas. Thank you for having this plenary sitting. I would like to thank the Speaker of the Seimas also for the sitting and for her speech, for her moving speech. I would like to talk on the behalf of the Lithuanian Jewish community on memory. It seems that the memory of Lithuanian Jews is easily reduced to commemorations and tours. Official commemorations by government representatives and interactive tours for foreigners. 1.5 hours for both. Now we are here to officially commemorate the liquidation of the Vilnius ghetto 80 years ago. And I would like to invite you, I urge you, not to commemorate the Vilnius ghetto, but to remember it. And it's not enough to know the location and the boundaries of the Vilnius ghetto, although that would be a good start. The Vilnius ghetto is not just the territory, streets and houses in the old town. First of all, people lived there. I say lived, but there's no word in the dictionary to describe the condition of those who were forcibly evicted from their homes, taking with them only what they could carry in their hands and herded into narrow streets, small apartments, if they were lucky enough to get an apartment, or rather a room, corridor or a storeroom, where they froze not only because there was no heating, but also because of the constant threat of death. But their will to live was stronger than that, and that is why the Vilnius ghetto is not only a story of death, but also of life. One might ask, how can one go to the theater, to concerts, to exhibitions in the face of death? How can one create art? Why is still worth reading books? What is the point of studying if you might die the next day? Why treat the sick if tomorrow they might be killed? There are people who find it easier to give up and accept. But the Vilnius ghetto never gave up. It was brutally destroyed. The building and streets were destroyed. People were unfortunately killed in Paneriai or deported to die a slow death in concentration camps. What is left? Commemorations? And I say the memory remains.
Lentelė kabanti ant
A plaque
namo
on a
Jablonskio
house at the intersection of Žemaitijos and Mikalojaus streets modestly mentions the resistance movement of the Vilnius ghetto. In reality, it is the impressive, long, dangerous work of hundreds of people in preparation for the impossible fight against the Nazi regime. I do not think they expected to win, but they certainly did not agree to give up without a fight. Let me remember Viktor Frankl's words. By meeting his inevitable fate and suffering, a man can have an opportunity to have a meaningful life in the most difficult circumstances, even on the last minute of his life. The choice of Abba Kovner, Shmergy Kaczynski, Fania Branchowska, she's still with us. She's a living witness of the Jewish tragedy. And the other ghetto fighters to join the resistance movement at that time meant one thing: death in the ghetto was replaced by the death in the forests. Those who survived began a new fight, which continues today, to preserve memory. Today we have a tradition to read the lists of prisoners of the Vilnius ghetto out loud and tell their names. I would like to believe that you know at least one name of one prisoner of the Vilnius ghetto. I would like to believe that you know about the city engineer Shmuel Kaplinsky, who rescued Jews from the Nazis. I want to believe that you know where the theater of the ghetto, Vilnius ghetto, was located, where was the only green tree in the ghetto, in which street stands the ghetto library, ghetto schools, ghetto hospital buildings, and many other places whose memory cannot be destroyed. I would like to believe that you are aware of the deeds of the Book Brigade in rescuing and preserving the priceless treasures of Jewish culture that is now the pride of the YIVO Institute in New York. I would like to believe that you know the names of Juozas Stalkauskas, Marija Mikulska, and Ona Šimaitė. If you are uncomfortable listening to me, I invite you to take some time before the next commemoration to remember the Vilnius ghetto. Take a couple of days to read at least one book or a diary that has survived to tell us about the destruction of the ghetto life. Take an hour and a half to visit the Jewish museums in Vilnius. It's worth knowing your city. Is that too much? Take a minute and a half to stop by the memorial stones marking the houses in the old town where Vilnius Jews lived. Read and remember at least one name, and then next year we will all remember instead of commemorating. I've been taking part in these commemorations for many years. Nothing changes, maybe the faces of the participants. And my speeches do not change. And actually, I say the same things every year. The adequate commemoration of Panare continues to be only in the plans. It's very difficult to arrange tours in the Panare Memorial and to see the memorial. And there's no memorial to see the Jewish saviors. And Lithuania needs that memorial to honor some of its bravest and most forgotten citizens, people who risked their lives and their families' lives and sheltered the Jews who were destined to death. They set the bar high for humanity, compassion, and courage. For this reason, they are also not only Lithuanian, but also world righteous. If we cannot honor them directly, let us at least stop honoring those who sow death and hatred against the Jewish people. 80 years is a long time, but not too long to forget the threat posed by anti-Semitism. Not too much, because there are still people alive who have seen with horror what anti-Semitic speeches from the government can lead to. Today, such remarks should disgust us. We should condemn them, as it is the only proper response to the hate speech. Can you hear those remarks but remain silent? Silence is terrible in the face of the storm of hatred. This is why I say you cannot hide the past. It is symbolic that after so many years, after the destruction of the Jewish community, we have we have recovered the foundations of the old Vilniaus synagogue. Now that 80 years have passed since the almost total destruction of Lithuania's Jewish community, and when at least 2 generations have changed, do we have the courage to take the weight of shame off of us? Thank you.
Dėkoju gerbiamai Fainai Kukliansky ir norėčiau pakviesti pasisakyti.
Thank you, Ms. Kuklansky. And I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Dani Dayan, Chairman of the Yad Vashem Directorate, for his word.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Holocaust survivors and their families, Madam Speaker, and members of the Seimas, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Abba Kovner, a leader of the Vilna ghetto's partisan fighters, who grew up in this city, in Vilnius, wrote in one of his books the following. One day, my son told me, "Dad, I would like to go to Vilna with you, and you could show me where it all happened." My son was surprised when I told him, "Son, that place doesn't exist anymore. Strangers live in my house. We can't go see it. The school where I learned Hebrew has become a lumber shed. The ghetto was plowed. There is no memorial for the Beit Midrash of the Vilna Gaon. The Jewish streets have been turned into sport fields, public parks. And because all that is gone," so Abba Kovner said to his son, "that place has no meaning anymore." I stand before you today in Vilnius, in the parliament of a democratic and independent Lithuania, and that is a great privilege for me. Yet, I feel sad, very sad. Sad because the places where Kovner and his fellow Jews, my fellow Jews, lived before the Shoah, the legendary Yerushalayim Delita, no longer exists. The Beit Midrash of the Vilna Gaon is no more. The old Jewish market is gone. Hundreds of thousands of Lithuanian Jews were murdered in this country by the Germans and by their Lithuanian collaborators. Almost the entire Jewish community of Lithuania became extinct. the totality of the destruction of such a community, a remarkably vibrant Jewish community, almost like none other, of such a creative Jewish culture, annihilated so cruelly, so systematically during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, and to a significant extent by the local population, is characteristically distinct to Lithuania. Insane, poisonous anti-Semitic hatred eradicated an entire civilization, my civilization, here in your homeland. To quote the words attributed to the prophet Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, Alele ani bochia, eini yorda mayim, ki rachak mimeni mechnachem mashiv nafshi. For these things I weep. My eye runs down with tears, because the Comforter is far from me. Still, I dare with great consideration and respect to partially disagree with Abba Kovner, especially regarding his final words, that that place has no meaning anymore. Because for me, for so many Jews, for Lithuanians and others, that place, call it Vilnius or Vilna, or as the Yiddish pronunciation, Vilne, does have meaning, now and in the future. It must have meaning. Madam Speaker, this is my second visit to Lithuania in less than 12 months. I have met your Prime Minister and the Speaker of the Parliament, both in Vilnius and in Jerusalem. I met with your Foreign Minister, whose great-grandmother, Ona Jablonski-Landsbergini of blessed memory, has been recognized as a righteous among the nations, and today his son honors us here with his presence. I'm encouraged by their understanding of the issues. I am encouraged by the understanding of the issues concerning Holocaust remembrance in Lithuania. Significant actions are still to take place, but the attitude of the current Lithuanian leadership and of this parliament, of this Seimas, gives me hope. We are encouraged by gradual but substantial progress made over the years in Lithuania, including important initiatives regarding Holocaust remembrance and preservation of Jewish heritage, some of them together in cooperation with Yad Vashem. But unfortunately, I must say that not yet enough progress has been made. To the attitudes expressed and policies carried out by much of your country's leadership, and some of the resolutions adopted lately by this Seimas, by this parliament, are cause of hope, for hope. A great deal yet remains to be accomplished. Our task will not be completed until this understanding is not only part and parcel of your leadership, of your parliament, but trickles down to the very last member of the Lithuanian civil society. I am inspired to respectfully but clearly touch upon this sensitive topic by the example of memory of one of my predecessors as chairman of Yad Vashem, the late Yitzhak Zlotnitsky Arad, also known as Tolka, his nom de guerre as a partisan. Tolka was born in Svencionis, fought in the woods against the Nazis and their collaborators, and even infiltrated the Vilna ghetto to assist. Dr. Arad became a prominent historian of the Holocaust and contributed greatly to its research and remembrance. Tolka passed away in May 2021, shortly before I became chairman of Yad Vashem. And I know that he would have urged me to declare here before you, the distinguished Seimas, that an anti-Semite, especially a murderer of Jews, cannot be considered otherwise a good person. An anti-Semite is an anti-Semite is an anti-Semite. For sure, he cannot be considered a hero. In addition to refraining from attributing public honor to such butchers, Lithuania must consistently acknowledge that many of the Lithuanian Jews massacred in the Holocaust died at the hands of their Lithuanian connationals. And Lithuanians also took part in the extermination of Jews in neighboring countries. Such recognition is obviously owed to the Jewish victims, but also, and probably even more, to the present and future generations of Lithuanians. Forgetfulness is a wrong educational option for your youth. We should show zero tolerance towards anti-Semitism, including anti-Semitism in this chamber. This zero tolerance policy must apply also towards glorification of war criminals associated with the massacre of Jews. Such names as Noreika, Skirta, Kristaponis do not add to the honor of your nation, nor to its adherence to international norms of appropriate national remembrance. Distinguished members of the Seimas, Lithuanian history during the Holocaust indeed contained admirable rescuers. I myself, together with the Prime Minister, bestowed the title of Righteous Among the Nations on several of those heroes and heroines here in Vilnius last year in the Prime Minister's office. But Lithuanian history during the Holocaust also included vile perpetrators and, of course, many, many bystanders. All of them must be remembered accurately, proportionately, and in context. That is precisely why the ongoing efforts to promote accurate Holocaust research, documentation, education, and commemoration are so essential. In this respect, Yad Vashem pledges to continue working together with Lithuania, with its government, with its parliament, with its civil society, to accelerate the process and make it more comprehensive. Madam Speaker, next Sunday at sundown, on the 10th day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei, Jews all over the world will mark Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. I will be at home in Israel, living proudly and safely in a sovereign and independent Jewish state. But having returned barely 48 hours earlier from Vilnius, I am quite sure that my thoughts during Yom Kippur prayers will wander to a very different Yom Kippur, 81 years ago. In 1942, the 21st of September, today's date, was Yom Kippur. That same day, Herman Kruk wrote in his diary here in Vilnius the following: preparations have been made for Yom Kippur. The high point was to be the prayers in the theater auditorium. The hall is filled with Jews who have come to observe the holiday. Everyone is waiting for the chief of the Jewish council. He enters and puts on a prayer shawl. A great lament breaks out. It is the wind of Ponar, of death, of the children, women, and men who have been torn away. Herman Kruk somehow survived the Vilna ghetto, but he did not survive the Holocaust. In September 1944, 2 years after he wrote this lamentation of the murder of the Lithuanian Jewry, during Rosh Hashanah of that year, 8 days before Yom Kippur, 1 day after he managed to bury his diaries for safekeeping, and only 1 day before liberation, Herman Kruk was murdered by the Nazis in the Lagedi concentration camp in Estonia. Together with the other prisoners, he was forced to carry logs to a pile, spread them in a layer, lie down naked on them, and executed. The bodies were to be burned in a massive fire. Let me conclude with the words of the ancient Jewish prayer for the souls of those who have passed on. Merciful God, who dwells above, provide a sure rest on the wings of the divine presence amongst the holy and pure who shine as brightly as the sky to the souls of the 6 million. El male rachamim, shochen במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמת 6 המיליונים. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dėkoju gerbiamam Dani Dajan ir dabar kviečiu.
Thank you, Mr. Dani Dayan.
Vaizdo įrašą.
And I would now like to divert your attention to the screen, where we will listen to the video recording by Samuel Bach, a writer and painter who lived here in Vilnius.
I should say. Dear members of the Seimas, honorable guests, thank you for inviting me from my home here in Western Massachusetts to address you at this solemn event. Thank you for this very great honor, so meaningful for me. Vilnius, as most of you know, is where I was born. Vilnius was where my family gave me 7 years of the taste of paradise. Then the war began, I was 7. Some wise men say that there is a lot in mere numbers. So today, my city's age is 700. My own, 90. 90 is a wonderful age. I look back at so many decades. I lived in so many places. I have so many friends all around the world. I have a most gratifying career as an artist. I believe that my work contributes to people's pleasure, to their education and enlightenment. I had a rewarding life as a family man, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and friend to so many. And all this, and I'm only 90. So now comes the sad number, 80. 80 years after the liquidation of the ghetto of Vilnius. A day that is the symbol of the barbaric and gruesome and tragic destruction of the Lithuanian Jewry. Yes, I'm one of its rare, still living survivors, and bearing testimony is one of my sacred obligations. I was there 80 years ago. I saw it with my own eyes, and I would ask you to come to me, to follow me to September of 1943. I was a boy of 10. A boy of 10, I am clinging to my mother. We are crammed with other women and kids in a heavy truck of the German army. It is parked near the gate of the ghetto, and a few of the small children keep on crying, wet faces, running noses. Some of us sit on narrow benches, others share a dirty and slippery soil. Our destination is Suboc. The truck's engine isn't yet running. We are waiting. Perhaps other trucks are still being packed. Outside, the air is filled with a mishmash of voices, moaning and weeping, screaming of officers, loud yellings of orders. The sky is dark. It drizzles. The vehicle's thick canopy is still opened, and an old book of my drawing is pressing to my chest. I must protect it from the water. I know, I was told. The ghetto of Vilna is being liquidated. I turn my head and look around. Lines of men, women, and children stream from narrow streets to the gate that is partly opened. Backpacks, small water cans, bags, utensils, rolled up blankets, suitcases. Mother and I and the others in our truck have been assigned to the unit in which my father and all other fathers work. And that is where we are destined. I know that the crowd in the street isn't as lucky as we. They are sent to faraway camps. We, in our privileged truck, are lucky. Our forced labor camp in Skuboc is called Hakape. It's a good place. Apparently, it is directed by a good German. Yes, it will take me another 60 years to discover his extraordinary story, Major Plage, the Nazi who saved Jews. But meanwhile, Hakape is where my father welds military vehicles. They are adapted to run on burning wood, and Hakape produces sacks of cut-up wood. One day, my father will be carrying me in one of such sacks on his shoulder and saving my life. Later, he will be losing his. But this is a separate story. It will happen in the future. Hakape is near the town, and that for us is a good sign, because it isn't one of the faraway camps about which rumors of horror have been infiltrating the ghetto. Only later years will I learn names like Auschwitz, Treblinka, or Majdanek and what they really meant. Only in later years, as a grown-up, I could learn what the Holocaust really was. An industrialized machinery of atrocity, the murder of 6 million Jews. And besides this, as seen from today, also the in-depth laboratory of human behavior, a laboratory of extremes, of what some people can do to each other. A laboratory of the worst and the best that is in each one of us. The study of the Holocaust could never cease, should never cease. Innumerable depositions carry loads of stories about opportunism, dishonesty, vandalism, cruelty, sadism and crime, stories about indifference, ignorance, stupidity, shame, and denial, and on the other hand, tales of heroism, altruism, generosity, and self-sacrifice. No need to go on. You all know that I was saved by 3 extraordinary Lithuanians who did not hesitate to put in danger their own lives. So here I am. Meanwhile, before all this happened, in the German truck, waiting for several other trucks to get full and start running. And little do I know that also we, the fortunate ones, finally about 1,200 of us, we are also destined to be murdered, but later. Is there such a smell like the smell of panic and despair? I think that I remember it. I think that I remember it. I'm looking at some kids that walk on the ground. Will I ever see them again? We destined to Hakape are still permitted to hope and hope. Some people call it positive thinking, and then they smile. Yes, the ability of not losing hope is what has been keeping us alive so far. There has always been in me an inner eye that knows how to recreate the past. And while in the truck, longingly, it projects in me my life in the ghetto that is now gone. And I miss it. I have lost my beloved grandparents, yes, but in the ghetto I am with father and mother, and our daily existence is bearable, even if it is an ongoing struggle. Yet at age 8 and 9, I have colors and paper and time, and a strong belief in some miraculous salvation. I imagine unbelievable scenarios. Planks of wood create a bird on which I can fly. Even better, a plane that bombs the Nazis. Hitler is succumbing to a heart attack. Even better, Hitler is hanged by his neck. An accelerated triumph of the Allies. It crushes the evil Reich. More realistically, because of the murder of multitudes of inhabitants of the ghetto has abated, people believe that the Nazis have changed their policy. They seem to be needing more work hands. Of course, multiple beatings, torture, and killing of individuals still go on, but what can you do? People's souls are more and more hungry for the life of their spirit. Wasn't it Moses who said so in the Bible? Man shall not live on bread alone. Thus, the last year of the ghetto's existence knows an outburst of cultural activities. People gather, summon all that is alive in them, arrange cultural activities. All this is happening gradually after days of exhausting labor. And there is music, painting, theater, readings of poetry. Two famous poets, Sutskever and Kaczerginski, become interested in my drawings and watercolors. They set up an exhibit that takes place in a small theater, which is within the ghetto. Suddenly, I become the ghetto's well-known wunderkind. In the days of the liquidation, the 9-year-old child prodigy holding his arm in the pinkas is being sent to Suboc. And of course, meant to be finally murdered like every other Jew. But as you can see, I have survived. I am among the 4.5% of the Lithuanian Jewry that has survived. And so did the Pinkas, which is in the Samuelis Bakas Museum. It is part of the 8 decades of my exhibition of paintings. And they are to be seen there, now. Perhaps a world record of extended creativity. And the museum is doing a fine job. In recognition, I have again put aside a large collection of my art, over 150 paintings and works on paper. My second donation to the museum that intends to increase and complete its holdings. They express my profound gratitude for the permanent home that Lithuania has offered to the fruit of my ongoing toil. Today, these works are patiently awaiting the arrangement for their expatriation. Or rather, I should say, homecoming. Yes. My paintings, together with the books on my art, try to bring back to the many beholders and readers the memory of generations whose lives had been brutally destroyed, whose existence shouldn't be forgotten. Unquestionable, the Holocaust was an industrialized genocide, the grimmest one against humanity. But it was not the only one. It was not the only one. Too many cruel genocides have happened before the Holocaust, after it, and are still happening, even now. Yes, life on our planet has many points of light and many, many dark and long shadows. And my artwork that speaks of humanity's dark shadows or of their consequences arouses questions about the destiny of our human condition. It offers no answers. There are no easy answers. Yet, it thinks that there are many lessons to be learned. And today, when I see Ukrainian mothers and kids taking refuge in a welcoming Vilnius, I cannot help myself. I am seeing them myself and my mother. Some wise men say that history doesn't repeat itself, but of course it is full of variations. I imagine how the war in your neighborhood must have aroused your awareness and your determination. And I hope that you in this house, in the Seimas, who surely know how to ask questions, search for appropriate answers. Allow me to wish you the best, and thank you from the depths of my heart for letting me be part of this event and bring you my personal testimony. Thank you so very much.
Dėkojame Samueliui Bakui už nuostabiai.
We thanked Mr. Bach for his very emotional and sincere words. And we would now like to give the floor to Ms. Liudvika Pociūnienė, member of the Seimas and granddaughter of Stefanija Paliulytė Ladigienė, a righteous among the nations and member of the Seimas in 1926-1927. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues. I didn't think that I would have to start my speech today with an apology, but the bright memory of my grandmother obliges me to apologize for what colleagues from the opposition had done in this chamber 2 days ago, when considering the initiation of impeachment proceedings against a member of the Seimas. So, I am sorry for that. And I hope that nevertheless the perception that a word said irresponsibly may sometimes become the seed of great evil will prevail. When commemorating the tragic anniversary of this day, it is important to note that every year of existence of the independent Lithuania, there seems to be growing awareness among people that Lithuanian Jews killed during the Holocaust were no strangers to us, that they were our fellow citizens, and that their loss is the loss of Lithuania as a whole. It is unfortunate that this awareness does not grow as quickly as one would like to. There is also growing awareness that the bridgehead for the mass extermination of Jews in our country was prepared by the repressions carried out by Stalin's horde, which, by the way, did not bypass the Jews too. With the first wave of mass deportations, many of Lithuania's brightest people ended up in Siberia. I have no doubt that if they had remained in Lithuania, they would have become a serious obstacle to Nazi ambition of, so to say, addressing the Jewish issue. Quite recently, I've learned that according to the Vilniaus Museum of Jewish History, Lithuania, despite the repressions during the first Soviet occupation, is the second top country in terms of the share of its citizens recognized as righteous among the nations of the total population, with only Denmark making to the top of the list, a country which has universally been recognized as the European country to have resisted the Holocaust most effectively. Besides, Nazi punishments for rescuing Jews differed in Western and Eastern Europe. Denmark's highest punishment for hiding Jews was 10 months of hard labor, while in Lithuania we knew of cases where entire families of rescuers were killed. It is then that you begin to understand the kind of courage it took for the people to shelter a Jew in hiding in your home. People from all walks of life had found the courage to take such action. Among the nearly 1,000 of the people recognized as righteous among the nations were ordinary farmers, priests, nuns, notaries, doctors, teachers at orphanages, and people of other trade. And it's not the numbers that matter here. All those stories are about the light shining in the darkness, about courage and love, and about the sincere gratitude of those rescued. Some of those stories are better known. For example, the story of Petruskai family, who sheltered Danutė Suciai Pomerans, a 1.5-year-old girl at the time, who was taken out of the ghetto in a sack of potatoes. She went on to become a famous violinist and an academy professor in Boston. My grandmother, Stefanija Paliulytė Ladigienė, sheltered Irena Veisaitė, a teenager at the time who had escaped from the ghetto. My mother recalls how long my grandmother used to speak to Irena in the evenings before she and her sister Jone would finally go to sleep. My grandmother was concerned that the 16-year-old who had just lost her beloved mother had someone to lean on, to talk to, and so she tried to embrace her with motherly warmth so that she would not fall apart and find the strength to live. After that, it was Irena herself who radiated with extraordinary attentiveness that everyone who was lucky to know her remembered. She inspired many of her students to stay true to one's devotion to be a teacher. And as head of the Open Society in Lithuania Foundation, she was taking care of the translation and publishing of the world's classic books that were very important for the maturity of society. Nijolė Bražėnaitė, the fiancée of the legendary Lithuanian partisan Juozas Lukša, aka Daumantas, was one of the 20 students of Kaunas University that had been closed, who were granted the right to continue their studies in Germany. And she made also use of these circumstances to transfer the news of the unprecedented extent of the annihilation of Jews in Lithuania to the free world. From the like-minded people in Lithuania, she would receive parcels with newsletters with the latest information hidden in a loaf of bread. In 1943, few people knew about it in the West, and those who were aware of it could not believe it. Meanwhile, Nijolės mother, Konstancija Bražėnaitė, who remained in Lithuania, sheltered in her home 2 children who had escaped from the ghetto, Aleksandras Greenhausas and Sarah Shilingovsky. After the war, one of them settled in the United States and the other one stayed in Israel. When Nijolė, who had already become a widow, met her new family members, all 3 took action to secure the releasing of Konstantia from the Gulag. The Soviet officers would send cynical responses to their letters and requests, saying essentially, "Do not even dare to think that we would release the mother-in-law of a bandit." But the young people did not give up and offered the decision-makers a couple of $1,000s. It worked. And soon enough, Konstancija Bražėnaitė was able to embrace Nijolė, Alexis, and Sarah in America. I sometimes wonder what our shrinking towns would look like if their Jewish inhabitants, craftsmen, tradesmen, doctors, musicians, and their entire families had not been killed in the nearby gravel pits or forests. They would probably now be full of life, much like the bustling streets of Vilnius are. The streets would be full of children running up and down them, and in the evenings the cafes there would be crowded with people. The streets next to the walls of the former Vilnius ghetto, which once absorbed so much pain and despair, are also bustling. And the sculpture of the good doctor and a girl, reminiscent of those times, can often be seen photographed by school children or guests of the city. The sculpture is a sensitive reminder of the victory of humanity in the darkest of times. And the scale of the tragedy is perhaps most strikingly illustrated by the fate of Jokūbas Gensas, chief of the ghetto police. He, just like the members of the Judenrat, accepted the decision-making power imposed by the Nazis, which meant death to some while life to others. During the campaign of extermination of children, Gensas found a way how to save a few of them by pushing some of the doomed children towards the families that had only one child. But his conscience could no longer carry the full weight of the burden of feeling guilty for the blood of the innocent shed. So he ultimately took his own life. I believe that today he finds himself in the merciful place in the company of the victims of that brutal crackdown. Today, we are marking the anniversary of the horrible massacre for a good reason, that is, to make sure that it never happens again. However, when we say the words "never again," are we as Europeans are not being hypocritical? Should our conscience be at ease when blood is being shed today in Ukraine? Perhaps this war would not have even started if it was not for our frivolous blindness. Be it 80 years ago or now, evil rages not because it is invincible. Rather, it is because of the indifference, fear, selfishness, and simple ignorance of actually good people. The choice we have today is the same. That is either to give up or keep up the fight. Thank you.
Dėkoju Seimo nariai Liudvikai Pociūnienei, kalbės istorikas Klaipėdos universiteto.
Thank you to Ms. Pociūnienė, and we will now give the floor to Dr. Zigmas Vitkus, a historian, research fellow at the Institute of Baltic Region History and Archaeology of Klaipėda University, and author of a scientific monograph titled Forest of Memory, Ponar in History, Culture and Politics.
Gerbiami Lietuvos Respublikos vadovai, brangus renginio svečiai.
Dear members of the Seimas, distinguished guests. As Lithuania restored its independence 33 years ago, it started pursuing its historical memory policy. The guidelines of it emerged in the early texts of the Lithuanian reform movement Sąjūdis. One of the first documents in newly independent Lithuania was related to the fate of the Lithuanian Jewish community. I'm referring to the declaration of the Supreme Council of the May 8th of 1990 that stated Lithuania's will to commemorate the victims of the genocide of the Jews. Those were not empty words. During the first 7 years, the graves of the Holocaust victims were marked, the sites were cleaned up where possible. The landscape of the memorial markers of the Holocaust victims in Lithuania was developing, and it allowed the curious ones to observe this part of the memory of the Second World War, which has been ignored by the Soviet Union. In Lithuania's politics of memory, the Soviet repressions were always highlighted. However, the Holocaust was also gradually included into Lithuania's official historical narrative. And now we have the community of people who find the topic of the Holocaust important and moving. Lithuanian culture of Holocaust remembrance is richer than ever, but there is one area, and on which I would like to focus in the speech, one area that lacks attention and political leadership. It's the development of the Holocaust museums. At least a certain part of Lithuanian public who sincerely care about the connection to the past would already like to move to the next level. I'm referring first and foremost to the cleaning up of the Paneriai Memorial site as well as the establishment of the Vilniaus Ghetto Museum, which have been started 5 and 9 years ago. Recently, there has been a lot of talk about the idea of a new museum of Lithuanian Jews in Vilnius. But we must finish what has already been started, the Paneriai Memorial and the Vilniaus Ghetto Museum. We can also dream about the exhibition dedicated to the rescuers of Lithuanian Jews, for example, in the Benedictine monastery in Vilnius, where Samuel Bach was rescued. There was a special shelter behind the books and made out of books. It is widely known that the Holocaust museums serve many purposes in the society, documenting and interpreting the past, moral and political appeal. They also have educational value and offer a certain aesthetic representation. And I dare to say they are underused in Lithuania, even though their added value to the society is enormous. They're not only a good tool to develop people's historical consciousness, but also to shape the values of the society. After 80 years of the Holocaust, the importance of these institutions of memory is as great as ever, because now we are in the transition from the communicative to the cultural memory. And we are left with texts, stories, recordings, artwork, memorials, and museums which will have to serve us as a means to maintain our relationship with the past and the future. Usually, such museums offer educational programs for school students, teaching them to notice and react to manifestations of anti-Semitism. I can imagine a teenager after such training going back home and asking their father, who makes an anti-Semitic remark, "Dad, why are you talking like an idiot?" As in the original meaning of the word idiot in ancient Greece, it was used to describe a person who cared only about themselves. I'm certain that every new establishment or renewal of a memorial provides scope and depth to every culture of remembrance and also gives prestige to country. And another mission of these museums is to develop moral imagination and empathy of the society, as the Ukrainian writer Anatoly Kuznetsov wrote in the novel Babi Yar, "Even killing of a fish is hard if you have an imagination." During public events, we are often reminded not to forget about the Holocaust, to learn from the past. Those are good and true words, but one needs a certain context established to be able to learn and to remember. The best Holocaust museums are those that combine both memorials and centers of education and research. They can provide the required context. I would like to finish my speech with the words of Ralph Levy from the Jewish Museum in Amsterdam. With his words, he said in 1993 in the commemoration for the 50th anniversary of the Vilnius Ghetto liquidation, "A stone is enough for the first generation, for they have their own memories. But in the long run, stone is not enough, and it is necessary to tell why the stone is there." Holocaust museums are also spaces for such worldview-changing stories, and I hope that these spaces do not become secondary in the Lithuanian culture of remembrance. Thank you.
Dėkoju daktarui Zigmui Vitkui. Atmintis yra gyva.
Thank you, Dr. Vitkus. A memory lives as long as it is being transferred for future generations. Our plenary sitting today is observed by many young people as well, which is why I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Vanessa Radžinskytė, a public activist and member of the Jewish community of Šiauliai district.
Lietuvos Respublikos Seimo pirmininkė Viktorija Čmilytė Nilsen, ministrė pirmininkė.
Madam Speaker, Madam Prime Minister, President Professor Vytautas Landsbergis, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. In front of you stands a girl born in Šiauliai who has never denied or was not afraid to say that she was a Jew. Let me briefly tell you today the story of my family, one that is painful and difficult, but is inspiring and serves as a lesson in that there always comes a light after the storm. I believe that every Jew, or at least the majority of Jews living in Lithuania, can share with you similar stories. My great-grandfather, Sia Mark, was born in 1901. He was a craftsman by trade, a well-built man, meticulous, and not afraid of hard work. He had a wife named Sima Reise, 2 daughters, Mary and Sarah, and a son named Ruin. They lived a peaceful life in Šiauliai. That was until the war began. The beginning of World War II saw the increasing persecution of Jews. They were being forced to wear a distinctive sign, they were imprisoned in concentration camps, and there were no better days in sight. Forced into the Shavli ghetto, later taken to Stutthof, Poland, and finally to Dachau, north of Munich, Bavaria, Germany, he was forced to leave his family. My great-grandfather did not leave us voluntarily. He was forced to do so by the German regime, just like the rest of the 200,000 Jews of Lithuania. Thanks to his strong build and infinite will, he was not killed, but he was forced to work heavily and hard. Finally, he managed to see the end of the war and return to his homeland. However, he did not find his family at home. My great-grandfather's daughters, Sarah and Mary, were taken to Poland, where they met their final days in Auschwitz. The archives contain no information on the fate of his son and his wife. On his return to Šiauliai, my great-grandfather met my great-grandmother, Kana, who was more fortunate during the war. Born in 1909, Kana, under the then maiden name Gleiser, along with her brothers and sisters and other Jews who lived in Žagarė, managed, thanks to Brother Nathan's perseverance and courage, to catch the last train leaving for the depths of Russia and later for Central Asia, where they awaited the end of the war. They walked from Žagarė to Riga on foot, with bullets flying by them. Nana Kanas, as the family called her brother Nathan, was conscripted to the 16th Lithuanian Division, where he fought against the Nazis until the end of the war. Unfortunately, he failed to save Esther, one of his sisters, who ended up in the Shavli ghetto and was later taken to a concentration camp in Germany. She was killed there when she was only 16 years old. Shrol, another brother of Nana Kana, along with his young children, met the same fate. He was taken from Shavli ghetto to a concentration camp in Germany and was killed. Chaim, another brother, along with his family, was murdered in Panevėžys. Nana Kana was more fortunate. After awaiting the end of the war in Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan, she returned to Lithuania, where she met my great-grandfather Sia and gave birth to my grandmother Dora, another daughter Masha, and son Yankel. From a very young age, I was taught the history of my family and my nation. Although the history of the Jewish nation spans more than 4,000 years, my family would still find a way to tell at least a fraction of it every day. Realizing how powerful this nation was and what a majestic and complex history we had lived through, I was proud to accept the fact that I was a Jew. I have never renounced it, and no one will ever make me do it. During my first school years, this fact did not disturb anyone, neither me nor those around me. However, as I was growing and changing, as the lessons of history were introduced in school, and as I learned about the really difficult stages in the history of the Jewish people, and with the so-to-say incitement of the school assignments, I soon had to face abuse, name-calling, and poems admonishing everyone what needs to be done with the Jews. I grew up eventually, so did the people who behaved like that. After graduating from school, I have listened to their apologies, with them telling me that they did not understand then what they were talking about and how they behaved. So I can only say one thing. Let's start talking about bullying and civilized behavior in our own homes today, so that we could eradicate the stigma from the public life, and not only with regard to national minorities. Today we have gathered here to pay tribute to the Jews who were forced into the Vilna ghetto and to remember the parts of history that shocked the whole world. Today we find ourselves engulfed in a series of events that will go down in history course books. A war is currently taking place in Ukraine, and it also affects the whole world. The Ukrainians have been forced to flee their country and seek refuge abroad for more than a year now. Today, as we mark the anniversary of the liquidation of the Vilna ghetto, and as I recount the history of my family, my experiences in school, and that infinite sense of pride that I feel when I say that I am a Jew, I would like to encourage everyone to remember the history of my nation and teach your children that the stories of every nation are important and that we cannot oppress or bully others just because of their different nationality. Let us help the Ukrainians in Lithuania today, and let's support them in the simplest aspects of everyday life, especially children at school. It is important to remember that the lessons of history are not only about sadness and pain, but also about wisdom, strength, and restoration. Learning from the mistakes of the past enlightens us, enables us to build a better society where solidarity, tolerance, and understanding of different nationalities and cultures are appreciated. Let's embrace it. So today, when we remember the past and share our story, we seek to not only pay tribute to those affected by the storm, but also inspire others to seek light, reconciliation, and a better future. This is our responsibility. Thank you.
Dėkoju Vanesai Ražinskytei ir baigiamai mūsų minėjimo žodį kviečiu tartis.
Thank you, Ms. Ražinskytė. And to conclude our commemorative ceremony, we would now like to give the floor to Mr. Emanuelis Zingeris, Honorary Chairman of the Jewish Community of Lithuania, founder of the Vilna Gaon Museum of Jewish History, and signatory to the Act of Independence, and member of the Seimas.
Didžiai gerbama Seimo pirmininkė, labai svarbus svečiai.
Dear Speaker of the Seimas, distinguished guests, colleagues, members of the Seimas, I would like for those who have elected me for 8 times to the Seimas, I would like to thank my voters as a person who can speak about the painful past of Lithuania, including the Holocaust. Today, it's very important to say that we have people of the first or second generation that have survived the Holocaust. I can see Mika Kantar, Dina Porat, thank you for your years of work for Lithuania. Also see Christoph Dichmann, who has been working to remember the past of the Lithuanian Jews. I remember when my mother would hold me as a child very strongly in her arms, very tightly. And she told me that they used to take away children from their mothers. But I'm interested how the remembrance, the memory of those people becomes the story, our own story of our country. It's a very important thing because the Israeli flag has been flying alongside other flags, expressing solidarity for the Lithuanian nation. And Israel has respect for the Lithuanians resistant to the Soviet occupation. And during those 50 years of Soviet occupation, we have to be thankful for them for calling Lithuania Lithuania. And many people in the 50s, 60s, 70s represented Lithuania. In Israel, they were trying to find their surnames, the surnames of 1,000 people, of 1,000 Lithuanians. So the Israeli society has done a lot for the righteous among the nations. And we try to understand the level of our society's empathy. 94% of the Lithuanian Jews were killed. Doesn't it mean that the Holocaust is a unique phenomenon and that the collaborators and Gestapo were looking for every child, for every person till the very end? We were discussing in the Seimas about anti-Semitism. We were talking about be a human being, and it maybe should be an element of our constitution. Imagine Rabbi Snow, who helped the Jewish soldiers who fought for Lithuania. The association of the Jewish soldiers was repressed by Joseph Stalin in 1940. And I would like to tell you a fact that the number of Jews deported to Siberia was extremely high. Those people were deported by the Stalin regime. The Vilnius elite was deported to Siberia. And why do we keep this poison, this idea that Jews were on the Soviet side? Why do we think so? The Jews were on Lithuania's side for 700 years, and it's a very important fact that every town had a solid population of Jews, 40% of Vilnius population in the 19th century were Jews. This very city is built by the people who are no longer with us. Once again, I would like to say that the bar of our conscience should be higher. As I looked to Mr. Kaminsky, we commemorated the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. It was a glorious event to commemorate those who fought against the Nazis. I offered to call this day of commemoration, to call it the day of the genocide of Lithuanian Jews and resistant to the Nazis.
Can you imagine Jews who were playing Bach, Mozart, Beethoven in the Vilnius ghetto, people who were stripped of children, people who were trying to show that they were no slaves, that they were free people. These were people who lived in Vilna ghetto, Šiauliai ghetto, Kaunas ghetto, a place where I lived. These were people who, even though prisoners, they tried to live as free men, even though they faced intimidation. That's how the state of Israel was also built, on the basis of resistance. At the moment, there are only 14 million of Jews worldwide. The number would be much higher if it was not for the Holocaust. During the UN General Assembly, Lithuania is constantly voting in favor of Israel's right to live and exist next to such states as the United States, even though there are states who vote in favor of resolutions undermining Israel. Just yesterday, we've unveiled a plaque for Antanas Ulpis, a person who treasured the legacy of Eiba Kovner, Sutskever, and others. This was our way of making sure that Israelis would be able to read the Jewish literature that was produced here in Lithuania. Let me also point out that quite recently, together with Madam Speaker, we opened the Square of the Righteous Among the Nations in Šiauliai. We also have there a monument dedicated to Juozas Krištaponis, and we're waiting for many years now until it will be removed. The Lithuanian Genocide Center must coordinate all actions to make sure that this happens eventually. As it has been mentioned today, we cannot afford ourselves to glorify the people who once shot people, young and old. We have to review the list of those people that we glorify, because I am absolutely certain that the majority of them are true heroes, but not all of them may remain heroes. This should be our common approach, even though there might be some people who might vote otherwise. Another point, when we speak about the word Holocaust, Mr. Kuklansky and I sent a joint letter to Putin asking him not to use the word Holocaust for his hostile purposes. Only we, the Jewish nation, can use that word. So please do not use that word for your propaganda and imperialistic aims. The letter was made publicly available as well. I've also mentioned the Warsaw Ghetto. My brother, Markas Zinkeris, long-standing director of the Vilna Museum of History, Jewish History. My brother, who's now passed away, was a person who was also talking about the name of the ghetto. Vilna ghetto resistance was something that we've constantly would talk about. And we would always talk about an anthem by a Jewish poet who died in the Vilna ghetto. So, if I may, I would like to say a few words in the words of a poem by my late brother Markas Zingeris, titled The Burning of the Ghetto, in the memory of the 1943 Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. I am the Warsaw Ghetto. I am its hard-scrabble mounds, its sack of potatoes, and filthy child. I am the Warsaw Ghetto, oh my homeland, flooded Solomon's wine, blood from balconies, corpses on rooftops. I am a month eternal, above the street's skeletons, above love's skeleton. I am the Warsaw Ghetto. Let's join the fight, sticks held high, beards forward, defy kitchen greed, children like soldiers from our balconies. When the sun's medallions on a backdrop of dirt and their gray blood and eyes alive and rushing, and the violin's motive with centuries of blood. Let me thank you for the focus you put on these issues and for your votes on these matters when it comes to commemorating this memory of those events. I'm grateful for those of you who are making every effort to make sure that we keep our standards high whenever we refer to the preservation of the memory of those events in this hall. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zingeris. Thank you to all of those who took part in today's event. Thank you to the first President of Lithuania, Mr. Landsbergis. Thank you to Mr. Michał Kamiński, Deputy Marshal of the Polish Senate. Thank you to Mr. Daniel Dayan, Chairman of the Yad Vashem Directorate. Thank you to Mr. Samuel Bach, as well as to Ms. Faina Kuklanski, Chairwoman of the Jewish Community of Lithuania, as well as all those